In my last podcast, I went through who I believed were the top three most impressive drivers in the 2022 Formula One World Championship season, and today I'm going to do the opposite, the drivers who I've been most disappointed by or who have just been outright bad this season. Let me know in the comments below who you think it is, and let's get into this. So, my third most disappointing driver, or worst driver, will be Nicholas Latifi. Now, by large, or by right, he should be last in this because he has been outright the worst driver on the grid by a country mile this season. Outpaced by his teammate more or less every week. Finishes bottom of the drivers' standings of any driver who's been in a full-time race seat this season. His pace, how many times do you look and see how far he is off Albon in a race? Every single race I feel like I look at the timing and he goes from 3 or 4 seconds behind to 45 or 50 seconds behind, and you just don't know where that gap has come from. It's a consistent thing, and look, obviously he's lost his space in Formula 1 for the upcoming season, and rightly so. I don't think he'll be back either. He may go off and try and race an IndyCar maybe, or another series, but I really, really do think that he was really out of his depth in Formula 1 this season. And now look, it hasn't all been bad for him. Of course, he got the result in Japan this season where he came home with his only points of the season. Made it to Q3, I believe, in Silverstone as well. And last season, obviously, he got his points in Hungary also. So it hasn't all been bad, but for the majority of his time in Formula 1, he has looked massively out of his depth. I believe the qualifying gap to his teammate is the largest of any of the drivers on the grid as well. So, seems like a lovely, lovely fella, but unfortunately, he has been probably the worst driver of the season. In terms of disappointment, though, my second worst driver of the season has actually been Pierre Gasly. I think Pierre maybe is a victim of his own success over the last couple of years in Formula 1. Since he went back to AlphaTauri, Toro Rosso as it was then, his standards have been ridiculously high. He's been majorly consistent in his time, in Formula 1 since then. He's got, I think, 3 podiums, including 1 win, and he's really led that team comfortably, but I just think he's been really, really poor this season. Look, ultimately he beat Yuki Tsunoda, and maybe it's a bit harsh to have him on this list, but I just expect more. And look, the car obviously hasn't been good this season. It's on points, it's the second worst car, although I'm not necessarily sure it is definitely worse than the Haas. But he just hasn't brought it to the levels that he possibly could have. I feel like Tsunoda has kind of overturned the gap a little bit in the second half of the season in particular, and while Gasly has gotten a lion's share of their points, I think the majority of the kind of more impressive drives in the second half of the season have definitely come from Tsunoda. As well as that, he's become a bit of an accident risk. Not major crashes, but he's picked up a lot of penalty points. I think he's only 2 away from a race ban, and look, maybe some of this has been due to a lack of motivation at AlphaTauri now that he is going to go to Alpine for next year, but either way, I do expect more from him. I expect him to be a lot better next season. I think him and Ocon will be a really, really interesting matchup, but this season for me, he's been really disappointing. Maybe not the worst driver on the grid, definitely not the worst driver on the grid, but definitely one of the more disappointing ones. And finally, then, my most disappointing driver of 2022 can only be one man. It's a guy who's my favourite driver. It's Daniel Ricciardo. Smashed by Lando Norris. Absolutely demolished. It wasn't even close at any point in the season. It was never close. And for somebody who's won 8 Grand Prix, including one last season at McLaren, that is not good. That is really not good. He should have been consistently in the points. The McLaren, it wasn't a great car. It was a much worse car than it was last year. But it was still a car more than capable of getting points on a regular basis. So the fact that he finished as low as he did in the driver's standings, he finished as far off Norris as he did. I don't have the stats written down here, but I think he only beat Norris twice in qualifying. In a season that's been this long with this many races, to only do that twice is pretty poor, to say, to put it mildly. look, he's obviously lost his seat for next season, which I think is probably deserved based on his form over the last kind of 12 to 18 months. But, I don't see where he gets back in. I said it in one of my earlier kind of episodes. I don't see where he gets back in the sport. He's gone back to Red Bull, so maybe if Perez has a stinker in 2023, he might have a seat for 2024, but I find it very hard to see. So we'll have to kind of put a pause, obviously, on Daniel Ricciardo's career now, but this season alone, he's been the most disappointing by a country mile. I expect him to get a little bit more of a grasp of the car this season, but it's just never happened, and it's never even looked like happening, to be completely honest. So those are my 3 most disappointing or worst drivers of the 2022 Formula 1 season. Let me know who you think should be in it. Have I been a bit harsh, particularly on Pierre Gasly, or have I not been harsh enough on maybe Nicholas Latifi? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next episode.